"Sir, you need to put that weapon down right now." The command sliced through the peaceful morning air like a blade. Tyler Brooks, 26 years old and 3 months into his security job, stood over the elderly man with manufactured authority. His hand hovered near his belt, fingers twitching with adrenaline he'd never actually earned. Bob Harrison, 83, didn't even look up. His weathered hands continued their slow, methodical work, running an oil-soaked cloth along the walnut stock of the rifle resting across his lap. The weapon gleamed in the soft sunlight filtering through the oak trees of Riverside Meadows Senior Living community. "Did you hear me, old man?" Tyler's voice climbed higher. "No firearms in common areas. That's the rule." Bob's pale blue eyes finally lifted. They were clear, direct, unnervingly calm. "Just cleaning my rifle, son," he said quietly. "Humidity's bad for the action." Tyler let out a sharp laugh. "I don't care if it's raining cats and dogs. Hand it over, now." Bob's gaze drifted to the faded engraving on the rifle's receiver. His fingers traced words worn smooth by decades. "Operation Shadow Knife. We who are not. This rifle," Bob said softly, "hasn't been fired in 50 years. Before we continue, if this story resonates with you, type respect below and tell me where you're watching from. Bob Harrison's story proves that true honor never fades." I read every comment. The confrontation had drawn attention. Across the courtyard, residents paused their morning routines. Margaret Wells clutched her book tighter. Thomas Chen looked up from his rose bushes, his pruning shears frozen mid-cut. They knew Bob as the quiet man in 3G who never missed bingo night and always held the door for others. Tyler's partner, Dave Rodriguez, shifted uncomfortably. "Tyler, maybe we should just ask him to take it back to his room," he suggested, his voice low and reasonable. Dave had 20 years on the force before retiring to this easier gig. He recognized something in the old man's bearing that his young partner completely missed. "No," Tyler snapped. "Rules are rules, Dave. We let this slide, and tomorrow someone's target shooting by the pond." He turned back to Bob, his chest puffing out. "Sir, I need to see your resident ID, and I'm confiscating that weapon for safekeeping." Bob sighed, a sound like wind through autumn leaves. He carefully laid the cleaning cloth aside and reached into his back pocket, producing a worn leather wallet. He flipped it open to reveal his resident ID in a clear plastic sleeve. Tyler snatched the wallet from Bob's hand. The disrespect was so blatant that several residents gasped. He studied the ID, then began rifling through the other compartments with invasive curiosity. "What's all this junk?" Tyler scoffed, pulling out a small faded cloth patch. The insignia was unfamiliar, worn nearly smooth with age. "Playing soldier in your retirement?" Bob's eyes hardened. The calm water rippled, revealing something cold and deep beneath. "Put that back," he said. His voice had changed, losing its gentle rasp, replaced by something with edges of forged steel. "Or what?" Tyler challenged, emboldened by the audience. He leaned down, squinting at the rifle's receiver. "What's this writing? Operation Shadow Knife. We who are not. What kind of ridiculous club is this? Some kind of fantasy game for old-timers?" He reached out and touched the engraving, his fingers smudging the oil Bob had so carefully applied. It was the crossing of a final line. In that instant, the courtyard vanished for Bob. The smell of gun oil was replaced by the thick metallic scent of blood and cordite. The warm sunshine became oppressive jungle heat pressing down through a triple canopy. The murmur of shocked residents transformed into the buzz of insects and the distant, terrifying chatter of automatic weapons fire. He saw a face, young, barely 22, with a crooked nose broken in training and never properly set, eyes wide with fear and absolute loyalty, a man named Danny Cooper. The whisper came again, as clear as it had been 58 years ago. "Go, Bob. Don't look back, just go." The memory lasted less than a second, but it left thunder in its wake. Bob's hand shot out and clamped around Tyler's wrist. Not violently, but with impossible firmness, the grip of a man whose hands had known nothing but hard work and harder purpose. The strength was shocking, a complete contradiction to his frail appearance. Tyler yelped. more in surprise than pain, and tried to jerk his arm away. He couldn't move it an inch. "You will not touch this rifle again," Bob said, his voice flat and empty of all emotion. It was more frightening than if he had shouted. Across the courtyard, someone had seen enough. Emily Martinez had been cutting through Riverside Meadows on her way to visit her grandmother in the memory care wing. She'd watched the entire confrontation unfold, watched the young guard mock the elderly man, watched him snatch the wallet and ridicule the patch. Her own father had served 3 tours in Afghanistan. He had objects like that. Things that looked like nothing to outsiders but were sacred relics to him. She knew what she was witnessing. A violation. While Tyler struggled against Bob's iron grip and Dave stood frozen, uncertain how to intervene, Emily had her phone out. She didn't call 911. She didn't call the community's main office. She scrolled to a contact saved under emergency only, a direct line to a public affairs officer at Fort Campbell she'd met at a Gold Star Families Conference 3 years ago. Colonel James Reeves had pressed his card into her hand and said, "If you ever see a soldier or veteran being wronged, you call me, day or night. I mean it." She'd never imagined she'd use it. She pressed the call button, her heart hammering. "Colonel Reeves's office." The voice was crisp, professional. "This is Emily Martinez," she said quickly, moving behind a large potted tree for privacy. "I met the colonel in 2020 at the conference. He told me to call if I saw something." "What kind of something, Miss Martinez?" "I'm at Riverside Meadows Senior Living in Clarksville," she said, speaking rapidly. Her eyes locked on the unfolding scene. "Security guards are harassing an elderly veteran. They're trying to take his rifle. He was just cleaning it. One of them is mocking him, grabbed his wallet, putting his hands all over the man's rifle." "I see. Harassment is a serious accusation, Miss Martinez. Are they being physically aggressive?" "One of them is," she confirmed. "The young one. And the rifle. There's an engraving on it. The guard read it out loud. He said, 'Operation Shadow Knife, we who are not.'" Dead silence fell on the other end of the line. For a moment, Emily thought the call had dropped. She could hear muffled background noise, distant voices, but the person she'd been speaking to had gone utterly still. "Miss Martinez," the voice returned, and it had transformed completely. All professional detachment was gone, replaced by raw, focused urgency. "Repeat that name for me." "Bob Harrison," she said, "and the engraving. Operation Shadow Knife. We who are not." "Stay on the line, Miss Martinez. Do not hang up." The command was absolute. "Where did you say you were?" Emily repeated the address, her voice trembling slightly. She had the distinct sensation that she'd just lit a very short fuse. "Keep your eyes on Mr. Harrison," the voice commanded. "Is he safe right now?" Emily peeked around the tree. Tyler had finally broken Bob's grip by twisting his arm at an awkward angle. He now had handcuffs out, dangling them menacingly. "The guard is trying to arrest him," Emily reported, her voice tight with alarm. "Help is on the way, Miss Martinez. It will arrive faster than you can possibly imagine." The line didn't go dead, but Emily heard a muffled shout on the other end. "Get me General Pierce, now!" "I don't care if he's in a meeting with the Joint Chiefs. Tell him it's a shadow knife call." Back at the bench, Tyler had managed to get one cuff on Bob's wrist. "That's it, old man," he snarled, his face red with exertion and wounded pride. "You assaulted a security officer. You're a danger to yourself and others." Dave finally stepped forward, placing a hand on Tyler's shoulder. "Tyler, stop. This has gone too far. Let's just call the police and let them sort it out." "I am sorting it out." Tyler shoved his partner's hand away. He lunged for Bob's other wrist, cuffs ready. The residents watching began to cry out in protest. Margaret Wells actually shouted, "Leave him alone!" Thomas Chen had pulled out his phone and was recording. Bob didn't resist. He simply stood his ground, his gaze fixed on something far beyond the manicured lawns of Riverside Meadows. He looked resigned, as if this was just one more indignity in a life that had demanded he endure many. And then a sound came, faint at first, a distant rhythmic chopping that barely registered over the morning bird song. But it grew, rapidly, exponentially. It was a deep, guttural thumping that vibrated in the chest, a sound that did not belong in this quiet suburban sanctuary. Every head in the courtyard turned toward the sky. Inside a windowless briefing room at Fort Campbell, General Alan Pierce had been enduring a particularly tedious presentation on supply chain logistics when his door burst open. Protocol shattered. A colonel, his face sheet white, stood in the doorway with a phone clutched to his ear. "General Pierce, sir," Colonel Reeves said, his voice strained in a way that betrayed 25 years of military discipline. "We have a situation." The general, known throughout the command for his icy composure, fixed the colonel with a glare that could stop a charging bull. "This better be about World War III starting, Colonel." "It might as well be, sir." Reeves stepped into the room, and every junior officer could see his hands were trembling slightly. "We have a civilian report from Clarksville. An elderly man named Bob Harrison is being detained by private security at a senior living facility." He took a breath, and when he spoke again, his voice cracked just slightly. "Sir, they're trying to confiscate his rifle. A rifle engraved with the words Operation Shadow Knife, We Who Are Not." The air in the room went from cold to absolute zero. General Pierce's face, a weathered mask of stern authority, seemed to crumble and reform in the span of a single heartbeat. The name, the project designation, they were words from a ghost story, a legend whispered in hushed tones in the highest echelons of special operations. They were not supposed to be real. They were not supposed to belong to a man sitting on a bench in a retirement community. General Pierce stood up so abruptly, his chair toppled backward with a crash. He looked at the stunned officers around the table. "Everyone out," he commanded, his voice a low growl that left no room for discussion. "Reeves, you stay." The room cleared in 15 seconds flat. The general strode to the colonel, taking the phone from his hand. "This is General Pierce. Who am I speaking to?" He listened for a moment, his eyes closed, his jaw working. "All right, Miss Martinez, you did exactly the right thing. Keep watching him." He handed the phone back to Reeves. "Get me a real-time satellite feed of that location." He barked at his aide, hovering by the door. "Scramble the QRF. 2 birds, full tactical gear, sterile uniforms. I want them airborne in 3 minutes." "Sir," the aide stammered, "a quick reaction force for a civilian disturbance?" General Pierce turned, and his eyes blazed with an intensity the aide had never witnessed in 10 years of service. "That man is not a civilian disturbance," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "That man is the foundation stone upon which this entire command was built. You get those helicopters in the air, or I will personally see to it that you spend the rest of your career counting MREs in Alaska." The aide fled. General Pierce turned back to Reeves. "Shadow Knife," he said softly, as if testing the weight of the words. "I was a second lieutenant when they shut down that program. I saw the after-action reports, classified so far above my pay grade that I shouldn't have even known they existed." He grabbed his tactical vest from a hook on the wall. "Bob Harrison. I know that name. He was one of the originals, one of the 5. He strapped the vest on with practiced efficiency. "Colonel, those men did things that make our current Tier 1 operators look like Boy Scouts. They went into places we officially denied existed and did jobs that officially never happened. And now some punk security guard is trying to handcuff him?" Reeves said, anger finally breaking through his professional veneer. "Not for long," Pierce replied grimly. 3 minutes later, 2 UH-60 Blackhawks lifted off from Fort Campbell, their rotors hammering the air with primal force. General Pierce sat in the lead bird, his face set in stone, his mind racing through fragments of classified briefings he'd read decades ago. Shadow Knife had been a Cold War project. 5 men. Deniable operations in Southeast Asia and beyond. Missions so sensitive they'd been completely expunged from official records. The men who'd served in it had been promised anonymity, promised that their sacrifices would remain forever in the shadows. And one of those men was being humiliated by a civilian with a badge and an attitude problem. The helicopters didn't follow normal flight paths. They went direct, screaming over highways and neighborhoods at speeds that caused car alarms to trigger in their wake. Pierce's radio crackled. ETA, 3 minutes, sir. Push it, Pierce ordered. Get us there in 2. Back in the courtyard, the sound of the approaching helicopters had reached a level that could no longer be ignored. It was a physical presence, a wall of noise that made conversation impossible. Tyler had frozen, the second handcuff still dangling from Bob's wrist. Dave had stepped back, his eyes scanning the sky with growing alarm. Bob stood perfectly still, his expression unreadable. But in his mind, he was no longer in Tennessee. He was in Laos, 1967, the year that didn't exist in any official record. The memory came unbidden, triggered by the percussion of rotor blades. He was 28 years old, carrying 80 pounds of gear through jungle so thick that noon looked like dusk. 4 other men moved with him, ghosts in tiger-stripe camouflage. They had no insignia, no dog tags, no identification of any kind. Their mission: infiltrate a suspected Soviet weapons cache and confirm the presence of advanced surface-to-air missiles being supplied to the North Vietnamese. Secondary objective: destroy the cache if possible. Tertiary objective: leave no trace they were ever there. They'd been in country for 6 days, living on water and determination. They'd avoided enemy patrols, crossed rivers, and navigated by nothing but compass and dead reckoning. And then, on the 7th day, they'd found it. The cache was real. The missiles were there. And so was an entire company of NVA regulars. The firefight that followed was something out of a nightmare. 5 men against more than 100. They'd set their charges, but the enemy had spotted them before they could extract. Danny Cooper, the youngest of the team at 22, had taken a round through the shoulder, then another through the leg. Bob could still see him, propped against a tree, his face gray with shock and blood loss. The rest of the team had been cut down one by one. Jenkins, Moretti, Zhao, each death bought them a few more minutes, a few more yards. And then it was just Bob and Danny. The extraction helicopter was inbound, but it was 3 minutes out. Danny couldn't walk. Bob had tried to carry him, but enemy fire was too intense. They'd taken cover behind a fallen log, rounds chewing the wood to splinters above their heads. Danny had grabbed Bob's vest with his good hand. His voice was weak but clear. "Go, Bob. Don't look back. Just go. I'm not leaving you," Bob had said, reloading his rifle with shaking hands. "Yes, you are," Danny whispered. "Someone has to make the extraction. Someone has to tell them we confirmed the missiles. Someone has to remember we were here." The charges detonated. The ground shook. The explosion sent a fireball 200 feet into the air. In the chaos, the enemy fire had faltered for just 10 seconds. "Go!" Danny had screamed with the last of his strength. Bob had run. He'd made the extraction helicopter with enemy rounds snapping past his head. He'd looked back once and seen Danny, still behind that log, firing his sidearm with his one good arm, buying every second he could. The helicopter had lifted off. Bob had watched the jungle disappear beneath them. He'd watched the smoke from the explosion rise into the cloudless sky. He'd never seen Danny Cooper again. The rifle in his lap, the one Tyler had mocked and manhandled, had been Danny's. After the mission, it had been delivered to Bob in an unmarked crate. No note, no explanation, just the rifle, with its fresh engraving. Operation Shadow Knife, we who are not. It was a promise, a reminder. We were there. We existed. Even if the world could never know. Bob blinked, and the courtyard snapped back into focus. The helicopters were almost overhead now, their roar shaking the windows of the buildings. Tyler was staring at the sky, his mouth open, his face pale. Dave had backed up several steps, his hands raised as if to ward off whatever was coming. The residents had scattered, some seeking cover, others standing transfixed by the spectacle. 2 Black Hawks appeared over the tree line, moving with predatory grace. They didn't head for the helipad at the nearby hospital. They descended directly toward the great lawn separating the buildings. What happened next would be seared into the memory of every person present for the rest of their lives. The helicopters didn't land. They hovered 10 feet off the ground, their rotor wash creating a hurricane that tore through the courtyard. Hats flew, garden tools scattered, residents clutched at railings and each other, their clothes whipping wildly. The noise was beyond deafening. It was a physical assault, a hammer blow that vibrated in bone marrow. Side doors slid open, thick ropes dropped, and then men descended. They moved with a fluid, predatory precision that was mesmerizing and terrifying in equal measure. Gray tactical gear, faces hidden behind helmets and goggles. They hit the ground and spread out, creating a security perimeter with practiced efficiency that spoke of countless missions in hostile territory. They carried weapons, but held them in low, ready positions. Their movements were economical, purposeful. They didn't acknowledge the gaping residents or the frozen security guards. Their entire focus was on the lead helicopter. From that bird, one figure emerged. Not sliding down a rope, but walking down deployed steps as if exiting a corporate jet. General Alan Pierce, tall, ramrod straight, late 50s, wearing an operational uniform with no adornments. But he carried an aura of absolute command that needed no insignia. He strode across the lawn, the grass bending in his wake. His boots made no sound in the chaos. His eyes were locked on one person and one person only. Bob Harrison. He walked directly through the security perimeter his men had established. He walked past Tyler, who looked like he might faint. He walked past Dave, who had unconsciously come to attention. He stopped 3 feet from Bob and looked down at the rifle resting on the bench. His eyes scanned the engraving. He read the words slowly, reverently. Operation Shadow Knife. We who are not. General Pierce's stern, combat-hardened face transformed. The professional mask cracked, revealing something beneath, pure, unadulterated awe. His eyes actually misted. He stood up straight, spine like an iron rod. He brought his hand up to his brow in a salute so sharp, so perfect, it seemed to cut reality itself. It was not the casual gesture of a superior officer. It was the salute of a man in the presence of something sacred. "Mr. Harrison," the general's voice boomed, cutting through even the roar of the helicopter blades. "General Alan Pierce, United States Army. It is an honor, sir." An absolute honor. Bob looked at the general, and a flicker of recognition passed through his pale blue eyes. He gave a slow, tired nod, the acknowledgement of a king to a loyal knight. Pierce held his salute for a long moment before dropping his hand. Then he turned to face the assembled crowd of stunned residents and terrified security guards. His voice took on a formal, almost ceremonial quality. "For the benefit of those who do not understand what they are witnessing," he began, his voice carrying with parade ground clarity, "let me be very clear. You are in the presence of a ghost, a man whose name is legend in the halls I walk." He gestured toward Bob. This man, Bob Harrison, was a founding member of a special mission unit that, for all official purposes, never existed. The operators you see here, he swept his hand toward the silent, imposing soldiers arrayed around them. The men you might know as Delta Force, the most elite soldiers in the world, they walk a path that he helped carve. Pierce's gaze fell on Tyler, and the young man actually flinched. This man and his team undertook missions so classified, so dangerous, that they were completely deniable. They had no support, no rescue, no recognition. They operated in the darkest shadows of the Cold War, preventing conflicts you will never read about in any history book. He pointed at the rifle. And that weapon is not just a firearm. That is a relic. That is one of 5 rifles commissioned for Operation Shadow Knife. It is a piece of living history more significant than artifacts in the Smithsonian. The engraving, "We who are not," was their motto. Because officially, in the eyes of their country, they were not there. They did not exist. Pierce's voice dropped, became harder. But they were there, and thank God they were. A profound silence descended, broken only by the idling helicopter engines. General Pierce turned his attention fully to Tyler and Dave. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. His words were surgical strikes. "You," he said, locking eyes with Tyler, "are a disgrace. You wear a uniform. You project authority. But you have no concept of what true service means." Tyler's face had gone from red to white to a sickly gray. His hands trembled. The single handcuff still dangled from Bob's wrist, a symbol of his spectacular failure in judgment. "You mistook age for weakness," Pierce continued, his voice deadly calm. "You mistook silence for submission. You put your hands on a man who has more honor in his little finger than you will accumulate in your entire life. You mocked sacred objects. You violated the dignity of a man who gave everything so you could stand here in your cheap uniform and pretend to be important." Dave, the older guard, looked like he wanted the earth to swallow him. Tyler looked like he might be sick. "Your company's contract to provide security for this facility is now under formal review by my office," Pierce stated. "And I assure you, my review process is extraordinarily thorough. You can expect calls, many calls." But before Pierce could continue, Bob raised his hand. A simple gesture, but it stopped the general mid-sentence. Bob stepped forward, the handcuff still dangling from his wrist, and looked at Tyler. The young man was shaking, tears actually welling in his eyes from the overwhelming humiliation. "He was just doing his job, General," Bob said, his voice gentle again. "A little too much enthusiasm, maybe. Not enough wisdom. But he's young. We were all young once, weren't we? Full of fire and certainty." The grace in that moment was staggering. Bob's forgiveness was a more powerful condemnation than any tirade could have been. It showed the chasm between them. Tyler was a boy playing at power. Bob was a man who had wielded life and death authority and had learned the value of mercy. Pierce looked at Bob, then nodded slowly. "As you wish, sir." He turned to Tyler. "You heard the man. You have been given a gift you don't deserve. Learn from it." Pierce gestured to one of his operators. "Remove those cuffs. Carefully." A soldier stepped forward with a cuff key and gently removed the restraint from Bob's wrist. He did it with such reverence it was like handling a holy object. "Mr. Harrison," Pierce said, "I would like to invite you to Fort Campbell at your convenience. We have a heritage room. Your story belongs there. That rifle belongs there. Not hidden away, but honored." Bob's eyes drifted to the rifle on the bench. For a moment, his expression was infinitely sad. "That rifle stays with me, General," he said quietly. "It's a promise I made a long time ago. To a friend." Pierce understood immediately. He nodded. "Of course, sir. The invitation stands regardless. And if there's anything at all that you need, you call me directly." He produced a card and placed it gently on the bench next to the rifle. The residents, who had been frozen in shock, suddenly broke into spontaneous applause. Margaret Wells was crying. Thomas Chen bowed his head in respect. Others simply stared at Bob with new eyes, seeing a man they'd never truly known. Pierce saluted one final time, then turned on his heel and strode back to his helicopter. His operators collapsed their perimeter with the same fluid efficiency, ropes were retrieved, and within 90 seconds, the helicopters lifted off. They rose into the sky, banked hard, and disappeared over the tree line. The thunder of their engines faded. The courtyard returned to its usual quiet. But nothing would ever be the same. Bob Harrison sat back down on his bench, picked up his cleaning cloth, and resumed his work. His hands were steady. His expression was calm. But everyone watching knew they had just witnessed something extraordinary. Tyler stood rooted to the spot, his entire world-view shattered. Dave approached Bob slowly. "Sir," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I'm sorry. I should have stopped him sooner." Bob looked up and gave a small smile. "You did fine, son. No harm done." But there had been harm, and Tyler would carry the weight of this day for the rest of his life. In the weeks that followed, the incident at Riverside Meadows became the stuff of local legend. The security company issued a formal written apology to Bob Harrison and instituted mandatory training on veteran sensitivity and de-escalation protocols. The training was designed in consultation with General Pierce's office. Dave Rodriguez received a commendation for his attempts to de-escalate. Tyler Brooks was terminated, not for violating policy, but for lacking the judgment necessary for the position. About a month later, Bob was sitting in his usual booth at Martha's Diner, a small local spot he frequented for their coffee and apple pie. The bell over the door chimed, and Tyler walked in. He no longer wore a uniform, just jeans and a faded t-shirt. He looked thinner. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something that might have been humility. He saw Bob and froze. For a moment, it looked like he might turn and leave. Then he took a breath and walked over to the booth. He stood there, shifting his weight, unable to meet Bob's eyes. Finally, Tyler reached into his pocket and pulled out a $20 bill. He laid it on the table. "That's for your pie, sir," he said quietly. "And your coffee. I'm sorry. For everything. I was an idiot." Bob looked at the young man, at the genuine remorse in his face. He pushed the 20 back across the table. "Keep your money, son," he said, gesturing to the empty seat. "Sit down. Tell me about yourself." Tyler hesitated, then slowly slid into the booth. A quiet conversation began. Not a grand reconciliation. Just two people, talking. One young man learning that strength comes in many forms. One old man demonstrating that the greatest victories are often won with grace. The quietest heroes carry the heaviest history. Their valor isn't in shouted words or polished medals, but in the silent dignity with which they live. To everyone who typed respect and shared where you're watching from, thank you for standing with our heroes. Subscribe for more stories like this and unsung American heroes. See you in the next one.